Hey guys, today we are gonna learn how to play the famous Catalan opening. This is Fidemaster Michel, and as always I will try to keep it simple but strong. Keep watching. We have Catalan opening on the board after the moves d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, and g3. This is the main position for this opening. However, there are some transpositions, different orders. For example, we can see this position after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, and g3. This is exactly the same position. Basically, we want to play d4, c4, knight f3, and g3, and then continue with bishop g2 and short castling. One of the main ideas with Catalan is to use the bishop over the great diagonal, putting a lot of pressure in black center, and very often black will trade or we take a pawn on c4, and then the bishop is going to be even better in this diagonal. We need to mention some great masters who have been playing Catalan, and for example we can say Garry Kasparov, Vladimir Kramnik, and also Viswanathan Anand. When we play Catalan opening, black can choose between two main systems. They can accept the pawn on c4 either at this point or in some move later, and that's what we call open Catalan, or they can just do not capture, do not accept the pawn and play a little more solidly, and that's what we call closed Catalan. We are going to study, of course, here both of them. Let's see a main line where black is not accepting the pawn on c4 and they continue with a normal development, so it could be a closed Catalan system here. So it could be like bishop e7, we continue with bishop g2. This is a move we want and we need to play, of course. Black is going to play here, for example, castling. We can castle, and a normal move here is c6. We continue with bishop f4. It's hard to find a better square for this bishop than f4 in this position, and then black can play b6, and then we will play queen c2. The idea of this move is to protect the pawn on c4, but also clearing d1, so this rook is coming over d1 very often. This position is balanced. There are equal chances for both players here. However, I could say it's a little easier to play as white. When we look at the pieces, we see white pieces can move a little more, they have a little more space, and some black pieces have some trouble over there to be developed. So this is a slow position. We want to improve step by step. There are typical moves here like rook d1, as we already mentioned. Usually this knight goes over c3, and we want to play moves like knight e5, improving the knight, also clearing the diagonal for the bishop, and also have seen some ideas with knight d2 trying to play some e4. Now let's take a look at what can happen when they accept the pawn on c4 playing open Catalan. One more time, black can use two different approaches here. They can take the pawn and try to defend it as much as possible to stay with an extra pawn, whatever it takes, or they can just take the pawn but then give it back. So white will have to lose some tempos getting that pawn back, and then they can use those tempos to continue with development. This is the main line. We continue with bishop g2. They can play a6, and then we castle and knight c6. Here we want to play e3. Usually we want to move the queen or the knight, and of course we want to keep this pawn very well protected. That's why we want to play this move e3, bishop d7, and then knight c3, just improving the knight. Black can play here knight d5, and then there is this move knight d2. Now we want to try to get the pawn back, but also every time we move the knight we are clearing the line for our bishop. Black can play knight takes c3, b takes c3, and b5. The next move in this position is going to be the great a4. Right now there is a coincidence between the rook and the bishop on a8, so we have some pressure in the queen side. Right now we have a pawn down, but there is some compensation. Notice we also have some lead in development. And well, what's going to happen in the middle game? There are some interesting plans. For example, we can think of this idea, bishop a3, trying to trade dark squares bishops, but then after the trade there is this great plan of knight e4, knight c5. The knight is going to be great on c5. Other ideas here are queen g4, attacking g7, making it hard for black to develop. Also queen h5 is interesting, attacking interesting squares over here. Also, there is this main line in Open Catalan where they take the pawn, but then they won't defend it. So after Queen C2, trying to get the pawn back, they can just play A6, and once we get it, they play B5 and then Bishop B7. One more time, this position is equal. However, there are some very interesting plans for White in the middle game. We want to play Bishop D2 or Bishop F4. Usually we want to play Knight C3, and then is when we start with the pressure, because then we want to control the C file. This square and this square are not protected by black pawns, which means we can try to use them with our own pieces. Even more, if we can trade some of these pieces, then we can use them much better. So there are typical plans here, trading knights and bishop, so we can exploit the weakness on C6. Also the weakness on C7 on the pawn. This pawn is a little like backward, so we can put a lot of pressure there, and he will have to defend it with pieces. The question for today: will you try Catalan opening in your games? If so, come back and let me know how your experience was. I'm looking forward to read your comments. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. Help my channel with some like if it was like that. Subscribe so you get notifications for my next videos. Never stop believing. See you in the next.